My name is Ian and welcome to Planted. I'm on a mission to share my plant knowledge with you so that you can have more success with your own plants in your own yard. In this episode, I show you how I recycled 5 old window frames and turned them into a mini greenhouse. The plant inside is very choice, well worth growing, but I am borderline. Let me show you how I made my little greenhouse that will keep that plant thriving all winter long. Here we go. So this is one of my most favourite plants. It's called Edgeworthia. It's a selected form from Plant Delights. And I bought this 2 years ago and it was this high. And for the last 2 years I've had it in a 3-gallon pot and then in this pot for it to put on some mass around the stems and also put out a good root system. So this video is really a 2-for-1. We're going to feature the wonderful mini greenhouse made from 5 window frames, but I'm using this particular plant, this Edgeworthia, as my go-to. I've got the plant, so I need the greenhouse. I can make the greenhouse so I can grow the plant. One serves the other. But first, a little basic step on planting. I've shown this many times before, and I always get lots of comments about it. I use the size of the pot as my go-to measurement. This way I set it at the right height, and I can be sure that I've got a nice uncompacted ring of good soil around my plant in which new roots can properly establish themselves. Now, back to the Edgeworthia. Why is it so special? Great foliage, wonderful bark pattern, bright colours of flowers in February, and a really heady, beautiful fragrance. And it's also tender, so it requires a little bit more effort to make it work. Very carefully take out the pot. And because that pot is what your plant was in, you now know that it's an absolute perfect fit. Don't get too close to the edge, and very carefully lift up your pot and put it down in one motion. Now some people will go in there and rip up the roots. This plant doesn't have any girdling roots or rotating roots. It's not root bound in any way. And then you can just go back and give it a little light backfill, add the label, and make sure that it's at the right height. Here I'm removing one low-down branch that was going to grow through the crown, and I didn't like that. So now, let's get on with the building of the little mini greenhouse. This is a great beginner project. If there's a couple of you, then you won't need my little mitre brackets that I use to assemble my frames. One person hold the frame, one person drill. It's just drilling and screwing in the same place to get a nice tight frame. But just a few words of wisdom. You need to get 4 frames that are the same size, or at least the same height. They can be 2 longer and 2 shorter, and that would obviously give you a different shape. But be careful, you might end up with 10 windows, and they're all different sizes. And you really can't build anything with that. I would be very reluctant to go 2 stories high with another layer on top of this. I might do an arch and put polythene over it as my plant gets bigger. But I was very insistent in my mind with what I wanted. I put my plant in the ground first in the perfect spot, and then I start to build my frame around it. I'm not going to pick my frame up, I'm not going to move it. Next year I will dismantle it and store it, otherwise I may have used some construction adhesive. So work out your plan. What is it that you want to do in your situation? I have to see this frame coming down the end of February, early March next year, and I don't need it to last any longer than that. If you want to, you could put it on some pressure-treated wood. I didn't do that because I don't need to, but if you want to, you can. If you want to add more screws, you can. It's up to you. But you want to have simple, drill a pilot hole, add a screw, and make sure that the sides are fully connected, coming up nice and tight. It really is quite a straightforward project, and I think that there's a degree of nostalgia by reusing a window that could be 30 years old, 40 years old, who knows, and it not being put out to pasture immediately. When you start to put in your screws, go careful. It's thin glass, it's not very thick. You want to make sure that you're aiming to the outside of the frame and not into the glass. And I'd have a little practice first. The four sides are connected together with 2 screws on each corner for a total of 8. And then when I put the lid on top, I'll have some more screws on that. Here I am just removing those clamps. They made the job a lot easier. Now, no matter what I do, I always seem to leave a latch or a bracket or something. Take your time and go through your wooden frames, remove as many items as you can before you get to this stage. It's no big deal, it came off quite easily. Next step is to add your frame on top, and it's important that it's properly supported. That's why I have all those 4 frames terminate at the same height. I will put some screws in those frames to hold it down. For now I'm just adding some lattice. When the storms kick in, I'll put a piece of plywood on top of this, and that'll keep it just fine and go through the winter. So this little greenhouse is made out of recycled glass windows from my house. Now I've got to say very clearly here that they're old, they're very fragile, they can break, and it's probably not for everybody. But my plant inside now is going to have elevated temperatures in the winter. When the sun comes through and heats up the airspace inside, that heat will go into the soil, and then at night time when the temperature drops, because that ground is not frozen, it can release its heat and keep the interior warmer than it would be otherwise. But the real benefit of a little recycled greenhouse cabinet like this is the reduction of desiccation. Now, desiccation is a killer of plants, and what happens is you get very strong wind, very strong cold wind, and that will suck the water out of stems of plants. And you might need to have a dry, desiccating wind twice in the winter, and it'll take down tender plants. This frame prevents that from happening. Because the air inside is still, that desiccating wind can't suck out the water. Now, something to bear in mind is that these frames can get really hot. You do not, under any circumstances, want to seal it up completely. That is not a good idea. The temperature can spike. It could easily get to 70 degrees in there on a hot day in late January, easily. So, although this panel on top is a good fit here, there's a bit of a gap at the back, and that's on purpose. It'll stay like this for 4 or 5 weeks, and this will give this plant all the protection it needs. And as we move into the threat of winter storms, I will put a polythene cover over it and then screw it down so it's nice and tight. But I'll put in a pipe that will be in the back corner, and it'll be probably a foot down inside and come up with a little bend on it. And that will mean that we can get air circulation, and that air circulation is incredibly important. Do not make this and seal it up tight. It'll get way too hot. Now at the base, I typically will do some backfill, add a layer of leaves, so that I've got a nice seal on all 4 edges. With a spirit level, make sure that all 4 corners are level and that all 4 corners are in contact with the ground. You can then go back with a little bit of soil and backfill and make sure that all 4 sides are properly sealed up. And there is your little greenhouse. So thank you for watching my video. Tell your friends, tell your family, and as ever, happy planting.